What a great bunch of children and teen we have in our church. Amen? I think you just need to remember we are blessed to have a multi-generational church. And that is not the trend these days. The trend is either a whole bunch of old folks and a whole bunch of young folk, but not very much of this thing where we kind of cross over from the grandparent stage and want to be grandparents like me. No pressure, kids. And all the way down through kind of the middle part and down to the children and the teens as well. So we are blessed in that sense. My name's Craig, by the way, for our guests. I'm the preaching pastor here. Glad that you're with us today. I hope that you'll take advantage of the free latte after the service. Would love to get to know you a little bit. At the end of this service, I'll actually be down here at the front because we're going to talk about some theology and people may have some questions. And so I want to make myself available for that. But with guests especially, I'd love to connect with you as well. A couple things, marysvillenaz.org for sermons from the past as well as any information about our church. And this series in particular, that's important. The one I preached last week about the foundation for this idea of worshiping God, loving God with our minds, was really, really important. It was one that God kind of gave to me at the very end because I had gotten ahead of myself. And so I just really want to encourage you to go back and take a look at that one. You can see it on video. You can download it to your iPod or you can listen to it online. There's about 1,000 ways you can do that. But marysvillenaz.org and then go to the sermon part there. So, the sermon series we're calling Don't Check Your Brain at the Door. And this comes out of my own experience because I was the kid that always asked the awkward questions. I always had all kinds of questions about God and honestly, some really great people that loved God but just didn't know the answers. After a while began to kind of start to say things to me like, you just gotta believe, or you just gotta have faith, or you just gotta, and I have faith, I believe, but I have some questions, and I needed those questions answered. And after a while, I just began to feel like they were saying to me, you just need to check your brain at the door when you come into church and it'll just go better like that. And that just wasn't acceptable for me. And so a part of my own spiritual journey has been this learning how to deal with hard questions and think theologically about God. And so about once a year I do a sermon series along this line. And so I torture you all for that time. You're just going to have to deal with this. I get excited about it. But this is a really good foundation for you as we talk about these sorts of things. And I know for those of you that really connect with your brain, last service, they're all leaning in and listening to that. And then for some of them, it's like, okay, isn't it about time? That's okay. That's okay. We all kind of go on that journey, together. So let me kind of back up now and do a little bit of a review because there were some important things last week that I want to make sure we just, we get a hold on as we begin to think about rational Christianity. Or faith for thinking people. And for you computer guys, what I'm doing over this sermon series is I am updating your spiritual firmware. This is kind of the real low level kind of thing. And so that's what's going to happen. And updating firmware is always a little tricky, but that's what we're doing. So a couple of things in review. Number one, faith and rational thinking are not enemies. I just believe that with all of my heart. We talked last week. We're told to love the Lord our God with all of our mind. And he really meant that. That's an important sort of thing with your mind. In Romans 15, we're told to be transformed by the renewing of our mind, yeah. And so the mind and the thinking is really a big deal, and I'll be honest, I outright reject any kind of Christianity or faith that asks you to turn your brain off. That's just simply not the way Jesus came at it. So give me a chance, and I think I can kind of help with some thinking stuff over the next couple of weeks. Number two, love is the foundation. We talked about that. When Jesus was asked to sum it all up to get to the bottom line, he did not give us a theological prospect or a theological idea. He said, love God with your whole being and love your neighbor as ourselves. And whenever you get away from that, it's a real problem. We went on to say, what is not of love is not of God. And what we mean by that is that logic never trumps love, okay? Love always wins in the end, and it's about love. Logic is a means for understanding love and for propagating love, but it's always about love. What is not of love is not of God. And then we said how you think matters. Again, for Paul it mattered, for Jesus it mattered. How you think about God will determine how you relate to God. If you think he's angry, you're going to be afraid of him. If you think he's a judge, you're going to worry about legalism, on and on and on and on. So all through Scripture, how you think about God really matters. And then this one last thing that we're going to hit in all of our sermons, and that's this. It is not enough to be right. You have to be like Jesus. This is the one statement for this whole series, and I realize in some ways it's the antithesis of the series, because through the series I'm asking you to think critically about God, to turn your brain on, and to work hard. And yet, what I know is this. This is my saying, and this is hard won by my own mistakes. It's not enough to be right. There was a time in my life when being right was what it was all about. You have to be like Jesus. Which is why you hear me over and over again. Spiritual maturity is not the number of theological ideas you have. It's how much you're like Jesus. That's what spiritual maturity is about. So, this series is going to be really important for mom and dads. Just a little bit here. One of the reasons I do this is because we kind of live in an era where Christianity, the intellectual foundations of Christianity, are under attack in a lot of ways. In fact, a lot of society really kind of considers Christianity to be intellectually bankrupt and to not be rational and to be kind of stupid people sometimes. And your children are going to grow up in this world, and they're going to go out there and they're going to have to deal with the people that think like that. When they're going to go to college, they're going to run into all these ideas. And so it's really, really important that you teach them well now so that they'll be equipped when they face that out there. And honestly, there's some ideas floating around in Christianity that actually set kids up to kind of be beat down when they get to college. And so I want to really kind of lay a good foundation for you to teach your children, because what I'm going to teach you will withstand it when they get to college. Trust me, I've backed some college professors up with some of this stuff. But we get back to this. It's not enough to be right. You got to be like Jesus. Amen? Okay? It's through all of that. So this will be important to prepare your children for the world that's ahead. What we're going to talk about today is this. Is God dead? This was the cover of Time magazine in 1966. We live in a world that kind of militant atheism. There is no God. And really, we live in a time where it seems like people are trying to say there's this conflict between the world of science and thinking and the world of faith, and that you have to choose one or you have to choose the other. And so they think that science has won the day and God should be jettisoned. And there's a big background. It goes back in some ways to Darwin, when Darwin was kind of figuring out things. And he began to talk like somehow science would replace God, that we wouldn't need God anymore. There was a philosopher of the day, a guy by the name of Nietzsche. Some of you are regulars have heard me talk about Nietzsche a little bit. Nietzsche famously said, God is dead, and kind of started the God is dead movement. He didn't mean by it what he kind of got labeled with. He meant, actually, that if you claim you serve God, but your life isn't different from anybody else's, then God is dead to you. That's a legitimate criticism of Christianity. That's why I get back to it's not enough to be right, you got to be like Jesus kind of thing. We'll do a whole sermon on that a little later on. But he kind of started the God is dead moment. And so this wrestling back and forth. And so I want to kind of do two things this morning with you. And I know this is going to be kind of heady stuff, and it's okay, just hold on. But my two goals are this. One, to answer the intellectual challenge of atheists, and to give you some tools for teaching your children. When they say you're foolish to believe in a God, I have an answer to that, okay? And number two, to establish for you why belief in God is rational and how to get there. Why we believe in God and how He reveals Himself to them. So the good news for us is that Jesus actually kind of set us up really well for this. In John chapter 4, verse 23, there's something that's amazing that Jesus says that really helps us. And this is one of the things that makes me believe in the power of the Bible, because there's no way 2,000 years ago they could know that this language would be so important for us 2,000 years later when we're dealing with a whole different set of philosophical things. What happens, he's talking to the woman at the well. She's a Samaritan. Samaritans and Jews didn't get along. They had a disagreement about what God was like and who God was. The Jews had torn down the Samaritan temple. A lot of bad blood. So she kind of challenges Jesus with this idea about God and what God is like. And this is what Jesus said to her. This is so good. God is spirit. Let's say that together, just those three words. Yeah, and His worshipers must worship Him in spirit and in truth, okay? And so this is just a powerful thing that He would talk about God as spirit, because the word there for spirit, we're going to do a little Greek today because this is important. This is the word. Anyone know what that the English part there says? Yeah, besides Dennis. It's pneuma. Any of you ever worked with pneumatic tools? What's a pneumatic tool? Air. Yeah, you use air. And it comes from this Greek word. Pneumatic or pneuma, in the original language it says God is pneuma. And I don't want to use the word spirit because that's filled with all kind of meaning. I want to come back to this Greek word pneuma. Pneuma means spirit or breath or wind. They didn't really have the idea of air yet, but they could see what air did. They couldn't explain why it did it, but they could see it. And so the same word can be translated as spirit or breath or wind. And so Jesus says here, God is not this stuff that you see around you. God is spirit. God is pneuma. God is breath. God is wind. And that was an important concept for them because spirit, breath, wind was almost mystical for them because they didn't know what air was yet. That didn't exist in their world. For ancient people, though, they could see the effects of air. They don't know what it is. They could see the leaves rustle when the wind blows. They could feel the wind, but they couldn't see what it was that was touching them. And so wind became for them, spirit, breath, wind, became the idea of that thing that you don't know what it is, but you can see it working in the world. It's unseen, but it has impact in the world, and you can't explain it. And so breath or wind, God is that thing that you cannot see, but you can see His impact in the world. You can see Him working, but you can't explain where that came from. And the wind, all kinds of ways, not just His movement, but wind carries things like smell. How many of you remember what the house smelled like Thanksgiving morning? Yeah, we like some of the stuff that wind brings to us, those sorts of things. Or sometimes you can go outside and you can smell rain coming, especially if you're in the Midwest. It has a different kind of smell. So there's all these sorts of things, and they didn't know. I mean, when a leaf rustles, is there a little demon up there moving that leaf? We don't know. The leaf's just moving, but we can't see anything. And so spirit, wind, breath. So spirit is that unseen thing that makes things happen in the visible world. And that's really cool because we understand then that God cannot be seen. We cannot perceive Him directly through our senses, but we know He's there. Before they had the concept of air, they knew there was something going on, they just couldn't explain it. It was spirit, wind, breath, those sorts of things. And this is the same word that God uses in Genesis when He breathes into us our breath. It says He breathes into Him. Well, another translation would be He literally puts His Spirit in us. He inspirited us. The same thing applies in the Hebrew word and the Greek word. And so when God breathes into Adam, He doesn't just give him oxygen so they can go, He actually gives him the Spirit of the living God. That's why we're created in the image of God. And there's this spiritual thing in us that we can't explain and we can't touch and we can't prove it. We can't say, oh, there's your spirit, right? Which part is that in your left arm, your right arm? Is that in your toe? Where's your spirit? Well, we don't know. But we know it exists out there. And so that idea of spirit is an important thing. So hold on to that for a minute. God is spirit. Say, God is spirit. So hold that idea because now I'm going to do another thing and I'm going to come back to this idea and marry it to what I said there. God is spirit. You can't see Him, but you can see His actions in the world. So, modern atheism carries this idea, and atheism has been around forever. It's not a new thing, but it's just kind of become militant in the last decade or so. It says that God does not exist, that God is myth, God is fantasy. You need to get over it. The God is dead kind of movement that we talked about with Nietzsche and some of those guys. In fact, one of my favorite illustrations about Nietzsche, there's a famous story that after Nietzsche had passed away, a philosophy student that really loved him at an Ivy League school had written on the bathroom of the boys' bathroom, God is dead, and then signed it Nietzsche. And some weeks later, another student came along and wrote underneath of it, Nietzsche is dead, God. Kind of telling in some ways. But when you ask atheists, why do you believe that God is dead, or why do you not believe in God, they would give you this argument. This is a logical argument. There is no proof that God exists, therefore God does not exist. And this is logically sound. Internally, it's logically sound. But there is one problem with this. Anyone know what it is? Their assumption. They're presuppositions. In the world of logic and ideas, there's facts, and then there's logic that connects them, and there's conclusions, but all of that rides on a set of presuppositions, things about the world that we just assume are true without having to prove them. Okay? That's a presupposition. It's an assumption. When you assume something, it's true. I'm not going to deal with proving it to be true. The difficulty is when your assumption is wrong, even though your logic and your facts may be right, the whole thing is wrong because the assumption is wrong. So let me give you an example of this. Imagine for a moment, turn on your imaginations, space aliens come to our world, right? And they come here and their spaceship has no windows in it. They can't see out. They want to learn about our world. So the first thing they want to discover is what is grass like. I have no idea why they would choose grass. But they go and they look at Washington to find it out, and it's rainy there, so they go to the Midwest. And it's winter in the Midwest, and they have a mechanical arm that reaches down and pulls up a piece of grass into their spaceship, and they look at it, and because it's in the Midwest and it's winter, it's brown. Right? They go, oh, that's kind of interesting. So they go maybe to Kansas and they pull up one and it's brown. They go to Missouri and they pull up some and it's brown. They go to Oklahoma and they pull up it and it's brown. It's winter in the Midwest. All the grass is brown, all of that. And so after a while they've tested all over the Midwest and they've got like hundreds of samples of grass, and they would look at that and they would conclude based on the evidence and the logic that all grass is brown. Nothing wrong with the logic. Based on all my evidence, all grass is brown. There was a problem with the presupposition that they had adequately tested all grass. And that's what's happening in this. The internal logic, there is no proof for God, therefore God does not exist, is not a problem. The problem is the presupposition on which they have built this, and that's what I want to talk about this morning. So the purpose of science, the purpose of all of these sorts of things is to determine what is real. What is real in the world? Are you real? Am I real? How do we know what is real? And ancient people have struggled with this from way, way, way back. In fact, in the earliest times, the way you decided what was real was you asked the witch doctor. And the witch doctor would tell you this and this is real, and God thinks this way, and you better behave this way or you're going to get it, right? You know, that was kind of an ancient way of what's real. Whatever the witch doctor says is real, that's real. Other people would look to the stars and they would say, oh, based on the stars, that'll tell us what is real. And you know, if you ever do the horoscope thing, that's kind of an ancient way of what is real. You look at the stars and you fit into the right category and you get a horoscope. That's ancient way of discovering what is real. But after a while, people got tired of that kind of thing. And so they began to try to kind of systematize it and say, let's work on this a little more and see if we can figure out a better way to figure this out. And that gives birth to a thing called epistemology. Say epistemology. Okay, use that in a sentence this week someplace. Epistemology. Your friends will not know what you're talking about. And what epistemology is how do we know what is real? That seems like an important question. Okay, how do you know what is real? It's not enough to say, for the witch doctor to say, because I said so. Any of you ever hear that from your parents? Any of you use that on your kids, because I said so, you know? That's not good enough. So there's a lot of ways they've done that. One of my favorite is what's called constructivism. That was a long time ago. And in constructivism, it posits that what is real is your imagination, and that all of the rest of the world around you has been constructed by your imagination. So congratulations, you are all figments of my imagination. Some of you are like, all right, you know. I'm a figment of my imagination. And the way you know this isn't true is if it were a figment of my imagination, I would be taller and skinnier and better looking. You know, so I know that's not true. Okay. Idealism is another one. It's just, you just know. This is the feeler one. I just know what is real. Okay. So that's the way they went. Rationalism was where we got logic and all of those sorts of things. Whatever is logical is real. So 2 + 2 is... You're all rationalists. That's where that all comes from. Mathematics is actually a subcategory of philosophy. But the age today, what the philosophy of today is a thing called empiricism. Say empiricism. Okay, so if you don't want to use epistemology, you can use the word empiricism. Use one of those two in a sentence this week somewhere, okay? This is the current worldview, and it gives us 3 words that are important. The first one is proof. How many of you have ever heard the word proof? How many of you have ever said, prove it? Or had someone say to you, prove it. And by that, when we say proof, we mean it's real. And so literally the word proof means that it's passed the empirical test and that it is real. So when something is proven, it's real. Okay? And then facts. Facts are things that have been proven. It's true. So the table is hard. Okay? Anyone want to bang their head against this and test whether that's actually true or not? No, you all accept as fact that this is hard. That's what a fact is. And then evidence. Evidence are facts that point to a particular conclusion. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean it's true, but it points to that. So the space aliens had a lot of evidence that all grass was brown. They just didn't have the right assumption, but it was evidence. So evidence are things that point towards a conclusion. We'll talk about that more later. Okay? So, what science, what empiricism and science that comes from posits as true is this. What is real is what we can observe with our senses. See, feel, touch, those sorts of things, or mechanically alter in such a way so that we can see, feel, touch, the result of them, that sort of thing. And science kind of systematized all of that and set up scientific method. Ever heard of scientific method? Yeah, some of you have heard of that. You know, all of those sorts of things. And it's a good method. We like scientific method. We like empiricism. I like that when it's cold out, I can turn on a heater and it just gets warm in the house. I don't have to go start a fire. That's because modern engineering works on empiricism, works on scientific method. It's a good thing. I like that chairs are hard, you know. I like that sort of thing. It's good for us. But modern science, which is applied empiricism, can only detect reality that is observable through our senses. And that is a giant assumption. And it's the assumption that underlies all of the rest of science. Without that being true, we don't have any science at all. In fact, it kind of comes down to this. Only what can be observed is real. That's what empiricism says. Now, that doesn't mean directly observed. You can, nobody's seen an atom, but we believe in those because through indirect observation, we can see those kinds of things. So when I say observable, it's the big sense of the word of observable. Only what can be observed is real. Anyone else have a problem with that idea besides me? I mean, what if there are things that aren't observable that are real? What's science going to do about that? It assumes that all reality is observable. And so there's a sense in which science is based on a faith statement. Say that to an atheist someday, see what happens, okay? That all reality is observable. It doesn't allow that there might be other kinds of realities that aren't observable, because science is incapable of proving or disproving the existence of God, because God is spirit. And what is the definition of spirit? That which you can't see that has actions in the real world. So it can't observe, it can't look at it, can't even evaluate whether or not God exists or not. And so that's the limit. That's the key understanding in all of this, is only what can be observed is real in scientific method. And so I want to give you kind of a graph here to show you a little bit. And I take by faith that there is more reality than is observable in my world, and atheists take for a fact that it's not. But it's a faith statement on both of our parts. So this is what we know today. All of science, everything that's known in the world is this little spot, and this is constantly growing and changing, right? Science is not static. How many of you were taught that the atom was the smallest thing in the universe? Yeah. My son's into chemistry. Turns out there are things smaller than atoms. There's subatomic particles. It changes and it grows. So if that's everything that can be known in the universe, if that's everything we know today, this is what can be known. This is all of creation. Science studies creation. They get caught up with what God has already done, right? The problem with that is that assumes that that's all there is. And I would offer to you by faith that what is real is bigger than what we know. It's even bigger than what we can know. That there is more than the human mind can think or even imagine, is the way Scripture puts it. So, you see what I mean by this? And so the big truth is this. So they don't believe that exists. An atheist says that doesn't exist. I say that does exist. Both of us are doing this by faith. Neither one of us can prove this. So there's the underlying flaw. Don't go beat up on an atheist later on, okay? But there's the underlying flaw philosophically. Because God is spirit, science can neither prove nor disprove the existence of God. So the next time you hear a Christian say, we can prove the existence of God, just do. No, you can't. Because it doesn't deal with God. But neither can you disprove the existence of God, okay? Honestly, science can't even address the question. Anything outside the observable universe of science it's blind to it. So let me ask you a question. Go back up here, okay? How many of you have ever seen X-rays? Wrong. X-rays are unobservable. You have seen something like this that actually brings X-ray, the results of X-rays down into a world that you can see. X-rays are wavelengths that are actually above what we can see with our eyes. You know that when we see with our eyes, we see different wavelengths of things, right? That's what a rainbow is. It breaks it out into different wavelengths, so you get the different colors, and so you can see all of that. And there are wavelengths below us, like microwaves that are below our range, and there are ones above us, like X-rays that are faster than that. How many of you believe in X-rays? Yeah, I believe in X-rays. My dad was an X-ray technician. You know, X-rays paid for my growing up, that sort of thing. But the thing is, you can't see X-rays, but it doesn't mean they don't exist. You see what I'm saying here? Okay. How many of you are science fiction fans? Any of you really like the science fiction stuff, you know, and like the latest movies and they're out there in space and all that? How many of you think they're really out in space? They took cameras out there, they're shooting in. What? You laugh? You saw it on the screen. How many of you know what a green screen is? A green screen is the thing that it's green, and so the camera and the software can't see green, right? But it exists, and so they can put something else in that place. God is like that. The world of science can't see God because it's not in the range of things that it's capable of seeing. God is bigger than all of that. And so for us, it's always a leap of faith to either believe in God or to not believe in God. Sometimes they talk like not believing in God is the rational conclusion. Bah! Boy, does it rock their world when you start explaining this kind of stuff to them. But let me hasten on. I am not an anti-science guy. I'm a pro-science guy. So I would say this. Empiricism is not wrong. It is inadequate. You understand? Empiricism is not wrong. The table's hard. I like science and engineering. That's all good. But it's inadequate. It doesn't get at this larger reality in all of this. Okay? So it's not wrong, but it's inadequate. So the question then becomes, how do you know there is a God? Well, it turns out the Bible talks about this. If we can't get him through our senses, maybe there's another way we can get him. Jeremiah 20:13. When you seek me and find me, then you will seek me with all your heart. And you know he's not talking about the cardiac thing that pumps blood, right? We're talking about this spirit thing that's in us. The God who breathed into us, made us eternal beings. He put a spark of us in us. And there's something in the spiritual realm and the spiritual realm in us that begin to resonate together, and you begin to understand that there is a God out there. In fact, almost anybody I ever talk to, if you get honest with them, if I say, don't you think there's something more than this world? Isn't there just something in the back of your head, something that's just like, you can't explain it, you don't know, but you know there's something more? And they're like, yeah, I know there's, but I can't explain it, so it's not real. What do you mean it's not real? You know your heart, the fact that you were created in the image of God, even if you don't believe in God. There's something that resonates with him, with you. Because here's the truth of all this. God makes himself, next verse. Now faith is confidence in what we hope for and assurance about what we do not see. Spirit, right? Okay? Because ultimately God makes himself known to you and to me. We can't test for God, but we can hear God. We can see the results of what God is doing in the world. It's that still small voice that says, ooh, don't do that, that's a bad thing. It's that small voice that says, yeah, that's right. That's right. This week I was with someone in our church who God is kind of working in their life and a call on ministry, and they were sharing with me how they were preparing for another career, and they were literally going to their first interview to get their first job, excited about that, and they know right where they were on the road when God spoke to them and said, this is not for you. They went and took the interview, got offered the job, and had to say, oh, I'm sorry, I can't. Why? Well, God told me. It's like, yeah, maybe you're not the right fit. For me, when I was called to ministry, there was I was struggling with this. I wanted to do ministry on my own terms. That's a bad idea, by the way. And so God was in the service, and I literally heard a voice behind me that said, you either accept what I have for you or you back up in your spiritual life. And it was so distinct that it was behind me. I literally turned around to see who was behind me. You know who was behind me? Nobody. For several rows, there was nobody back there. Do I believe in spiritual things? Absolutely. Can I prove it? No. No, but there's something in my heart that resonates with the eternal that says, there is more. And you know it. Deep in your soul, you know that is true. And so this morning I want you to know, in fact, that given those things, really the greatest proof of God is love. Love. Not the fakey kind of like I love bacon sort of thing, although that's clearly evidence that God exists, is bacon, Remember the biblical definition is love is self-sacrificing love. You see, without a God, it makes no sense to sacrifice yourself for someone else. Because if there's no God, all you have is this existence. You better maximize it and have as much fun as you can, because when it's over, you are done. But there is something in us that calls us, that says it is right to give my life for my family, for my children, for my spouse. Our military that give their lives for us. If there is no God, they're idiots. And they're not idiots. I've met several of them. See, real love is the strongest example because it is self-sacrificing love. And just as we close and wrap up, and Bill's going to come in just a minute here, I want a couple things. Number one, if you're here this morning and you don't know that you are loved, I want you to know, rational thinking aside, the God of the universe loves you. Amen. And He sacrificed Himself for you. Sacrificial love. And you can know Him even today. I encourage you, just take a leap of faith. Because if you don't believe in God, you've already taken that leap of faith. You ought to try this one. Because it'll change your life. And you want proof for the existence of God? Changed lives. When they come to know Christ, they're changed forever. And then I just want to leave you with one last thing. That's what you need to teach your children, okay, right? God cannot be disproved, and God is love in the midst of all of that. And if you want another resource, just to remind us, it's not enough to be right. You have to be like Jesus. So don't go out of here and go find an atheist that you can prove wrong, okay? Don't do that. That's not what Jesus would do, because I've just given you some tools there. And then lastly, there's a great movie called God is Not Dead. God's Not Dead. It actually, I don't recommend Christian movies often because they don't get the philosophy right. And if you get it wrong, then an intellectual person will make fun of you and think you're really stupid. But this movie actually gets the philosophy right. And so I would encourage you to watch this. You'll learn a lot about how we understand God and how philosophy, and it's a great story as well. Someone in our church who's really into philosophy brought me onto that. All right. You love God? Amen. That's the key to all of this. So we're going to worship the Lord in giving here in just a minute. And if you're a guest, if you could put that communication card in, that would help us so much. We won't put you on a mailing list. We'd love to follow up with you. We're going to worship the Lord with our giving. We are thankful that God gives us resources to bring back to Him. Amen. God's tithes and our offerings in the midst of all of that. And then we're going to sing together, and then I'm going to come back with a blessing for you. Let's worship the Lord in giving, and let's sing.